rise, the courtroom stood like a wave, and Alice's heart slammed against her ribs. She lifted her eyes to the judge's bench and froze. The judge walking in wore a black robe and a calm face. Her graying hair was neat. Her gaze was steady, serious, and kind in a way that made people quiet without shouting. Alice's breath caught. It was her, the same elderly woman from the market, the same woman whose dress Alice had grabbed and torn days ago, the same woman who had only smiled and walked away. Now she was Justice Margaret of the Lagos Federal High Court, the person who would decide whether Alice would go home or go to prison. The clerk called the case. The State versus Alice. Alice's fingers trembled on the wooden rail of the dock. She looked at the judge and whispered, "No, it can't be her." Justice Margaret settled into her chair and lifted the file. Alice's world tipped. Earlier that week, Alice moved through her office like a queen nobody could touch. She spoke fast, walked fast, and never waited for anyone. People said hello. She didn't hear them. People asked for help. She waved them away. To Alice, time was a race, and she had to win. At 5:15 p.m., she shut her laptop with a snap. "I need groceries," she said, mostly to herself, and hurried out. Her navy blue suit looked expensive. Her ID card bounced on its lanyard. Her heels clicked, sharp and loud, like a tiny hammer on tile. Outside, Lagos was its usual mix of horns, voices, and warm evening air. She slid into her black SUV and drove toward the market. The sky was soft orange, and the smell of roasted corn and spices floated in the breeze. The market was busy, bright and alive. Traders called out prices. Children darted past with laughter. A woman bargained for tomatoes. A bus conductor shouted destinations. It was noisy. But to Alice, it was just one more thing to push past. She stopped at a stall to pick rice, peppers, and plantains. She checked her watch again and again because she hated standing in one place. When the trader turned to get change, an elderly woman stepped close, holding a small list in her hand. "Good evening, my daughter," the woman said in a soft voice. "Please, where can I buy?" Alice didn't let her finish. "Please, don't block me," she snapped. "I am sorry," the woman said, still gentle. "I only need direction to—" Alice moved to pass, but their shoulders brushed. Alice's temper lit like a match. She grabbed the woman's blue lace gown at the shoulder and yanked her aside. There was a quick rip. The lace tore open with a harsh sound, the fabric peeling like paper. Underneath was a simple white blouse. The woman gasped, holding the torn edge to her chest. People turned. A hush fell. "Why would you touch me?" the woman asked. Eyes wide, not angry, not loud, just hurt. "I only asked for help. You stood in my way," Alice said, heat rising in her face. "Next time, be careful." But even as she said it, she felt something pinch inside her chest. The woman's face wasn't proud or rude. It was tired and kind, and her hands shook a little as she tried to hide the tear. A young boy selling pure water stared at Alice. A pepper seller shook her head. A man holding bread said under his breath, "Ah, this is not good." In Kalauzid, the elderly woman did not shout. She did not call anyone. She just took a slow breath, pressed the lace to cover herself, and smiled. "May God guide your steps," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked away. Alice swallowed. For a second, the world seemed to stop around her. Then her pride pushed back. She grabbed her bag, took her change, and marched to the parking lot. Her SUV was parked near the gate. She tossed the groceries in the back seat, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. As she pulled out, she glanced in the mirror and saw the elderly woman again, now farther away, asking a trader for the same direction. The trader pointed, kind and patient. Alice frowned, then shook off the feeling. "Not my problem," she muttered. The road home was busy but moving. The city lights were waking up, dots of gold along the streets. Radio low, AC cool. Alice felt her shoulders drop. She thought about dinner, maybe fried plantain, maybe jollof rice. She thought about a hot shower. She wanted the day to end. Then it happened. A figure stumbled out from between two parked cars and staggered into the lane. Alice's eyes shot wide. She hit the horn. She slammed the brake. Tires screamed against the road. Everything felt slow and fast at the same time, like falling inside a dream. Thud. The sound was small and terrible. Her SUV stopped. Silence lasted 1 second. Then noise exploded, shouts, running feet, shock. Alice's hands clutched the steering wheel. She stared ahead, eyes wet, heart too loud. I didn't see him. He jumped out, she whispered, her mouth dry. People gathered around. Some tried to help the man on the ground. His clothes were dusty. A bottle rolled away and clinked against the curb. The smell of alcohol floated in the air. Call the police. Call an ambulance. Is he breathing? A young man in a brown t-shirt stood at the side, phone in hand, recording. His face looked worried, not nosy. He had seen everything: the man stumbling into the lane, the sudden jump, the impossible stop. Sirens cried in the distance. Police arrived. They checked the scene, took notes, and looked at skid marks on the road. It looks like the man jumped out, one officer said. Madam, please stay calm. We will take your statement. Alice nodded, tears finally falling. I tried to stop, she said. I tried. The ambulance came, but it was too late. The man didn't move again. Someone whispered his name. David. A quiet fell over the crowd, like a blanket settling. Then black SUVs rolled up, shiny and loud. A man in a rich agbada stepped out with 2 aides. His face was hard and angry. Where is she? He barked. Who killed my son? Sir, an officer began. From what we see. From what you see, the man snapped. Do you know who I am? I am Chief Anderson Donald. His voice cut the air like a knife. He is my only son. People stepped back. Some nodded at the famous name. Others looked away. Chief Anderson Donald turned his glare on Alice. You will pay for this. Alice's chest tightened. Sir, he jumped into the road. I tried to stop. The chief raised his hand. Arrest her. The lead officer hesitated. Sir, we must arrest her, the chief said again, calm but dangerous. Now, the young man in the brown t-shirt looked from Alice to the chief. He swallowed and stepped back into the crowd, guarding his phone like a secret. Fear moved across his face, but so did a small light of courage. 2 officers walked to Alice, eyes sad. Madam, please come with us, one said softly. You will be fine. Just follow us. Cold handcuffs touched Alice's wrists. Click. She felt the weight of metal and the weight of eyes. As they led her to the police truck, she looked once more at the road. The bottle that had rolled now lay still. The sky that had been gold was now turning deep purple. At the station, they took her statement. She didn't sleep. She sat in the hard chair, hands wrapped around herself, hearing the night stretch long. Morning came. The city woke up. So did the case. Alice was taken to the Lagos Federal High Court for her first hearing. The building stood tall and serious, with steps that made people slow down. Inside, the courtroom was crowded. Journalists sat with notebooks. Lawyers whispered to each other. The air was cool, but sweat still gathered on foreheads. People loved stories, and this was a big one. A famous chief's son, a shocking accident, a young professional woman in a dark suit, and a question no one could answer. Yet, what was the truth? Alice stood in the dock, her ID card tucked away now, her hands shaking a little. She felt small for the first time in a long time. All rise. The door behind the bench opened. The judge walked in, grey hair, calm eyes, blue lace in a memory torn by a hand that had not learned to be gentle. Alice's mouth fell open. A whisper left her lips. It's her. Justice Margaret sat, lifted the case file, and looked up. Her eyes touched Alice's for one quiet second. No hate, no anger, something else, something like a mirror. Call the matter, Justice Margaret said. The clerk's voice rang clear. The state versus Alice. Alice's breath hitched. Would the woman she hurt be the same woman who held her fate and her future? Justice Margaret's gavel lifted slightly, and then the courtroom door swung open with a bang. The gavel came down once. Bang. Court is now in session. Alice stood frozen in the dock, her heart thudding against her ribs. The voice that filled the courtroom was firm but calm. The same voice that had once asked her, "Please, my daughter, where can I find?" Justice Margaret adjusted her glasses and glanced over the case file. Her tone carried quiet authority. "Counsel, are both parties ready to proceed?" "Yes, my lord," said the prosecutor, bowing slightly. "The state is ready." "Yes, my lord." Alice's lawyer echoed nervously. Alice could barely breathe. Her throat felt dry, her palms clammy. How could this be happening? She thought. Of all the judges in Lagos, it had to be her. Justice Margaret looked up, her gaze briefly resting on Alice. There was no anger there, no scorn, only a stillness that made Alice's chest tighten with shame. The prosecutor began, pacing before the bench. My lord, the accused, Miss Alice Adeyemi, a senior employee of Metro Tech Limited, was involved in a fatal accident that claimed the life of David Donald, son of the distinguished Chief Anderson Donald. And mastered these, he turned dramatically toward Alice. The deceased was crossing the road when the accused recklessly drove her SUV at high speed, ignoring warnings from other motorists. That's not true, Alice blurted, before her lawyer could stop her. Order! Justice Margaret's gavel struck lightly. Miss Adeyemi, you will have your turn to speak. Alice lowered her head, tears stinging her eyes. The prosecutor continued, weaving his words like a net. The victim was well known in his community. His death has caused great pain and public outrage. The state urges this honorable court to deliver justice. Alice's lawyer rose next. He was younger, nervous, his tie slightly crooked. My lord, he began, this is a tragic case, yes, but not one of recklessness. The accused was driving within speed limit when the deceased, visibly intoxicated, ran into the road without warning. The police initially confirmed this before certain external influences changed the narrative. Chief Anderson, sitting in the front row in his embroidered agbada, gave a faint, dismissive laugh. His ringed fingers tapped the arm of his chair as if this were all a game he had already won. Justice Margaret's eyes shifted toward him, steady, unreadable. Then, back to the file. Continue, she said. The lawyer nodded. My lord, there was an eyewitness who recorded the entire event on his phone. Unfortunately, the video has not been presented yet, as the witness left in fear after the deceased's father threatened him. Gasps moved through the courtroom. Chief Anderson's jaw twitched, but he stayed silent. Justice Margaret leaned forward slightly. Do you have any proof of this alleged video or witness? The lawyer hesitated. Not yet, my lord. But the accused insists it exists. Justice Margaret tapped her pen against the file, then looked at Alice. Miss Adeyemi, she said softly, do you have anything to say at this stage? Alice's lips trembled. She looked around the reporters scribbling, the flash of a camera, Chief Anderson's cold stare. Then she turned back to the woman she had once humiliated. Yes, my lord, she whispered. I never meant to hurt anyone. That night, I tried to stop. He jumped into the road. Her voice cracked. Please, believe me. Justice Margaret studied her for a moment. In that silence, Alice remembered the sound of tearing lace, the look of disbelief, and the quiet words, May God guide your steps. The memory burned like shame on her skin. Finally, the judge spoke. This court will adjourn until tomorrow for continuation of hearing. Objection, my lord, the prosecutor began. Given the accused's influence and the pressure from media, we request immediate remand in custody. Alice's lawyer stood. My lord, the accused is not a flight risk. She's a responsible citizen and has cooperated fully with the police. Justice Margaret thought for a moment. Miss Adeyemi will remain under supervised bail, she said. She must report daily to the police station until this case is resolved. She banged the gavel again. Court adjourned. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Cameras flashed. The journalists rushed toward the exit. Chief Anderson whispered something to his aide and stormed out, anger flickering like fire behind his calm face. Alice stood trembling, her eyes still locked on the woman behind the bench. For a second, Justice Margaret looked up again, and this time their eyes met. No words were spoken. But Alice knew what that look meant. Life has a strange way of teaching lessons. That evening, the sky was dark, heavy with rain. Alice sat alone in her car outside her apartment. She hadn't eaten all day. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the old woman's torn lace, the man's body on the road, and her own reflection in the rear-view mirror. A reflection she barely recognized. She whispered, God, what have I done? Her phone buzzed. It was her mother calling, but she couldn't answer. The shame was too deep. Everyone in her estate had heard about the case. The news headline read, Is greater than tech executive, in fatal crash son, of politician dies. She felt her life collapsing, piece by piece. And yet, something in her heart whispered, You have to make this right. The next morning, she made a decision. She would go to Justice Margaret's house, not to beg for mercy, but to seek forgiveness, to say sorry for what she had done in the market. Maybe the same woman whose dress she tore could help her mend her shattered life. She changed into a simple gown, wrapped a scarf around her hair, and took a cab to Ikoyi. The driver dropped her in front of a modest cream-colored house with a small garden. Her heart pounded as she climbed the steps and pressed the bell. After a moment, the door opened. There she was, Justice Margaret. No robe now, just a plain wrapper and blouse, her hair tied back. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise, but she didn't speak. Alice dropped to her knees on the doorstep, tears spilling freely. "My lord, please forgive me," she cried. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't know my pride would bring me here. I'm so sorry for what I did that day, in the market." Justice Margaret's face softened, but she didn't interrupt. Alice kept talking, words tumbling between sobs. "That night, the accident, it wasn't my fault. But the man's father, Chief Anderson, he's using his power to destroy me. He's bribing the police, twisting the story. Please, I beg you. I don't have anyone else." The rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, soaking Alice's gown. But she stayed kneeling. Justice Margaret finally stepped forward, holding an umbrella over her head. "Stand up, my dear," she said softly. "You will catch cold." Alice obeyed slowly, eyes red, voice breaking. "You must hate me." The judge shook her head gently. "No, I don't hate you. I forgave you the moment it happened. Sometimes life allows pain to teach humility. Sit down." They sat together in the small veranda. Justice Margaret listened as Alice explained everything. The accident, the witness, the threats. Then Alice pulled out her phone and showed her a message she'd received from an unknown number. "Is greater than, I have the video. I saw what really happened. I'm scared to come forward. Please don't tell anyone yet." Justice Margaret took the phone and read quietly. Her face showed no surprise, just thought, "Do you trust this person?" "Yes," Alice said. "He was at the scene. I saw him recording." The judge nodded slowly. "Then tell him to come to court tomorrow. I will ensure he's safe." Alice looked up, stunned. "You'll help me?" Justice Margaret smiled faintly. "I'm not helping you. I'm helping justice. Everyone deserves a fair chance, even those who have once done wrong." Tears filled Alice's eyes again. "Thank you, Ma." Justice Margaret rose and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Go home, my child. Sleep. Bring your witness tomorrow." As Alice turned to leave, the rain stopped, and the sky broke open into soft evening light. She whispered to herself, Maybe not everyone I hurt will turn their back on me." But far away, in a mansion lit with gold chandeliers, Chief Anderson sat with his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and dangerous. "Tomorrow must go my way," he said. "Do whatever you have to." And the next morning, as the sun rose over Lagos and people filled the courtroom again, a single question burned in everyone's mind. Would justice speak louder than power? The morning sun spilled over Lagos, turning the courthouse marble steps into gold. People crowded the entrance, reporters, curious citizens, and even students from the law faculty nearby. Word had spread overnight. A powerful politician's son, a young executive accused, and the same judge she once humiliated. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Alice stood near her lawyer, clutching her purse with trembling hands. Her heart thumped so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Her eyes darted around the courtroom, searching. Would the witness show up? Would he really come? "Calm down," her lawyer whispered. "Just breathe." She nodded, but her throat was too tight to speak. Then the heavy door opened. Justice Margaret entered in her black robe, every step slow, every movement dignified. The courtroom fell silent. She sat, looked over the courtroom, then nodded to the clerk. "Call the matter," she said. "The State versus Alice Adeyemi," resumed for continuation of hearing. Justice Margaret's gaze fell briefly on Alice. "Are both parties ready to proceed?" "Yes, my lord," both lawyers replied. The prosecutor began, full of energy and confidence. "My lord, we have further evidence from the police confirming the accused's reckless driving. We maintain our position that she must be held accountable for the death of David Donald." Justice Margaret nodded. "Noted. Defense." Alice's lawyer stood and adjusted his glasses. "My lord, before proceeding, we wish to call an eyewitness who has come forward with video evidence of the incident." The prosecutor scoffed. Objection. My lord, the defense is introducing surprise evidence without formal submission. Justice Margaret lifted her eyes. Is your objection rooted in law or in fear of truth, counsel? A soft ripple of laughter ran through the spectators. The prosecutor swallowed and stepped back. Withdrawn, my lord. The judge gestured. Call your witness. The back door opened again. A young man stepped in, same one who had been there that night, holding his phone as the tragedy unfolded. He wore a simple shirt, nervous but determined. His name was Chinedu Okafor. He took the oath and stood in the witness box, glancing once at Alice, then at the judge. Justice Margaret's tone softened. You may speak freely, Mr. Okafor. Tell the court what you saw. Chinedu nodded. Yes, my lord. I was standing by the roadside near Maryland that night, waiting for a bus. I saw the young man David come out of a bar nearby. He was drunk, staggering. He was holding a bottle and singing loudly. He took a breath. Then I saw the accused's SUV approaching slowly. She was not speeding. Suddenly, the man stumbled into the road. She honked. She hit the brake. But it was too late. Gasps filled the courtroom. The prosecutor jumped to his feet. My lord, this man could be lying. Chinedu turned to him. I have the video, sir. I recorded it that night. He brought out his phone. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Justice Margaret gestured to the bailiff. Play the recording. The lights dimmed slightly as a projector flickered to life. The video began shaky but clear enough. The dark street, David laughing and weaving across the lane, the sound of Alice's horn blaring, the desperate screech of tires, and the thud. The crowd fell silent. You could even hear Alice's voice crying, No, somebody help! The moment it ended, the room was quiet enough to hear the clock tick. Justice Margaret leaned back in her chair. Mr. Okafor, she said softly, why didn't you come forward sooner? The young man hesitated. My lord, I was afraid. Chief Anderson's men came looking for witnesses. They offered money and threatened us not to talk. But when I saw the news, I knew it was wrong to stay silent. Justice Margaret nodded slowly, her face unreadable. Your courage today will not go unnoticed. You are dismissed. Until then, Chinedu bowed slightly and stepped aside. The prosecutor fumbled with his notes, pale and sweating. Chief Anderson, seated behind him, clenched his jaw so hard his cheek twitched. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something, but the chief waved him off sharply. Justice Margaret straightened the files on her desk and looked at both sides. Counsels, do you wish to make your closing statements today or tomorrow? My lord, Alice's lawyer said quickly. We are ready to proceed today. But the prosecutor stammered, My lord, given the new development, the state requests an adjournment to review. Justice Margaret's eyes cut through him like a blade. You have had time, counsel. We proceed. The prosecutor sat down quietly. Alice's lawyer began. My lord, the evidence is clear. The deceased's death was a tragedy, but not a crime. My client did everything she could to avoid the accident. The truth has finally spoken louder than influence. He looked toward Alice briefly, then back to the bench. We ask this honorable court to restore her dignity and freedom. Justice Margaret turned to the prosecutor. Your response? He cleared his throat, searching for words. My lord, the state will rely on the court's wisdom. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Justice Margaret picked up her pen and wrote something quietly on the paper before her. Very well. The court will deliver judgment tomorrow. The gavel came down. Adjourned. As people began to leave, Alice stood frozen, her breath shaky but filled with new hope. Reporters whispered, some even smiling in her direction. Her lawyer squeezed her arm. We did it, he murmured. We really did it. But Alice didn't smile. Her eyes were fixed on the bench where Justice Margaret still sat, watching her with calm eyes that seemed to see through everything, through her pride, her fear, her guilt. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then, slowly, Justice Margaret gave a single nod, a nod that said I kept my word, a nod that said justice is not revenge. Alice's throat tightened. She whispered to herself, Thank you, for not being like me. That night, Alice couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at her ceiling, the sound of the gavel echoing in her mind. Outside, the rain began again, soft against the window. She thought about how easily she could have lost everything, her freedom, her name, her life. Her phone buzzed. A new message appeared. Is greater than unknown number. You were brave today. Justice Margaret is not just fair, she's powerful. But be careful. Chief Anderson won't let this go. Alice sat up, heart pounding. She typed quickly. Is greater than Alice. Who is this? No reply came. She dropped her phone on the bed and looked out the window. Lightning flashed far away. She whispered, "What else can he do?" But deep down, she already knew people like Chief Anderson never lost quietly. Somewhere across town, in a mansion filled with smoke and anger, the chief stood before two men in dark suits. "You failed to bury that video," he said, voice low. "Now, she walks free?" The taller of the two men shook his head. "Sir, the judge is known to be incorruptible. There's nothing we can do." Chief Anderson's lips curved into a thin, cold smile. "Everyone has a weakness. Find hers." He turned away and poured himself a drink. "By tomorrow, I want her reputation in pieces." He lifted his glass slowly, eyes glinting. "To justice?" he sneered. "The kind money buys." The next morning, as Alice got ready to return to court for the final judgment, she had no idea that before the sun set, the powerful politician would make his next move, and this time it wouldn't just be her freedom at stake. The Lagos Federal High Court was overflowing. From journalists to law students, from lawyers to curious traders who had come to witness the arrogant woman's fate, every seat was filled. Camera flashes popped outside the court gates like lightning, and tension hung in the air like heat before a storm. Alice sat quietly beside her lawyer, dressed in a simple black gown this time. No makeup, no expensive jewelry. Just a pale, frightened woman who looked nothing like the proud executive she once was. Her hands were clasped tightly together, trembling slightly as she stared at the empty judge's chair. "Will she rule fairly?" she whispered to her lawyer. Her lawyer gave a small smile. "Justice Margaret isn't like other judges, Alice. Just trust the truth." But Alice's mind was loud with fear. What if Chief Anderson had done something? What if he threatened her? What if power won again? The door behind the bench opened. "All rise." Everyone stood. Justice Margaret entered in her flowing black robe, her face calm, unreadable. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and surveyed the room. Her gaze landed briefly on Alice, just a heartbeat, and then shifted to the crowd. The courtroom went silent. "This court," she began, "has heard arguments, reviewed evidence, and examined testimonies. What remains is judgment." Her voice was steady. Authority and compassion blended like thunder and rain. She opened the file, flipping through pages filled with highlighted lines and notes. Then she looked up. "Before I proceed," she said, "I want to remind everyone present that justice is not a tool of revenge, nor a favor of the powerful. It is a mirror that reveals the truth, no matter who stands before it." Chief Anderson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His gold wristwatch gleamed, but his face was tight with barely controlled anger. Justice Margaret continued, "The evidence presented by the defense includes a video recording from an eyewitness, Mr. Chinedu Okafor. The footage clearly shows that the deceased, David Donald, was intoxicated and ran into the road unexpectedly. The accused, Miss Alice Adeyemi, made every effort to stop, but could not avoid the collision." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. She raised her hand. Silence returned. The prosecution, however, she went on, failed to prove negligence or intent to harm. Their argument relied heavily on political influence rather than facts. Chief Anderson's lawyer stood abruptly. "My lord, that statement is—" "Sit down, counsel," Justice Margaret said sharply, her voice slicing through his protest. "This is my courtroom." The man obeyed, face flushed. Justice Margaret turned back to Alice. "Miss Adeyemi, what happened that night was tragic, but tragedy is not always crime. The deceased's death was the result of his own actions, not your recklessness." Kaluza's night, Alice's hands flew to her mouth, eyes wide, tears already forming. Justice Margaret continued, her tone softer now. "However, this court cannot ignore the arrogance that led to your earlier behavior, the same arrogance that made you despise humility, that made you forget that kindness costs nothing." Alice lowered her gaze, tears falling freely. "I remember you," Justice Margaret said, her voice calm but firm. "At the market. The day you tore my dress because I asked for direction." Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Alice's heart pounded. She wanted to hide, but there was nowhere to run. Justice Margaret looked directly at her. That day, you taught yourself who you were. Today, life is teaching you who you can become. She paused, then raised her gavel. Having considered all evidence and testimonies, this court finds the accused Alice Adeyemi not guilty of the charge of vehicular homicide. Bang! The gavel struck once, loud and final. The courtroom erupted. Reporters whispered frantically. Alice's lawyer exhaled deeply, relief flooding his face. Chief Anderson stood abruptly, anger flashing. "This isn't over," he barked, pointing toward the judge's bench. "You've made an enemy, Justice Margaret." Two court security officers stepped forward, blocking him before he could move closer. Justice Margaret didn't flinch. She met his rage with quiet strength. "Chief Anderson," she said evenly, "you may be powerful, but you are not above the truth. Leave my courtroom." The man hesitated, his pride fighting his fear, then stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the walls seemed to tremble. Alice stayed frozen in place, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she fell to her knees, right there in the dock, weeping openly. People whispered. Some even clapped softly. Others just watched in silence as she whispered over and over, "Thank you. Thank you. My lord." Justice Margaret rose from her seat. She walked toward the bench edge, her robe brushing the steps. The courtroom hushed again. "Miss Adeyemi," she said softly, "stand up." Alice stood, wiping her tears with the back of her trembling hand. The judge looked at her kindly. "You are free. But remember, freedom without humility becomes another kind of prison. Let this be your beginning, not your ending." Alice nodded through tears. "I will, my lord. I will never forget this." Justice Margaret gave a faint smile, then turned and left through the chamber door. The gavel's echo lingered in the air long after she was gone. Outside the courthouse, sunlight poured down, and reporters surrounded Alice. Microphones and cameras flashed. "Miss Alice, how do you feel about your acquittal? Do you have anything to say about Justice Margaret's role in the case? Will you sue Chief Anderson for defamation?" Alice raised her hand weakly. "Please," she said quietly. "I just want to go home." She made her way through the crowd, her lawyer shielding her from the reporters. But deep inside, her heart was full, not with pride, but with something new. Gratitude, humility, peace. Later that evening, she sat alone in her small living room, staring at the sunset through the window. Her mind replayed everything, the market, the accident, the courtroom. And through it all, the calm, forgiving face of Justice Margaret. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Is greater than, you're free now. Justice lives. Be grateful." She smiled faintly and whispered, "I am." Then she looked down at her phone again, at the name she had saved earlier, Justice Margaret. She hesitated, then typed, "Is greater than Alice. My lord, thank you for saving me from myself, not just from prison." Seconds later, a reply came, "Is greater than Justice Margaret. The best justice is transformation. Live right, my daughter." Alice's eyes filled with tears again, but this time, they weren't from pain. They were from healing. Weeks passed. Alice didn't return to her old office. She volunteered at a charity, instead helping elderly women in markets, carrying their bags, finding directions for them, listening to their stories. Each time she helped someone, she remembered the torn lace, the quiet smile, the words, "May God guide your steps." And somehow, she felt guided. But one morning, while she was setting up tables at a community event, she turned around and froze. A tall man in a grey suit was watching her, smiling politely. "Miss Alice Adeyemi," he said. "Yes?" she replied, puzzled. He handed her a business card. "Jacob Williams. I was at the conference last month. We spoke briefly before the panel started." Alice blinked, trying to remember. Then it came back, the friendly man who had complimented her idea about community inclusion. "Oh, yes. Hello," she said, shaking his hand. "I just wanted to say," Jacob said with a warm smile. "Your story, it inspired me. I'd like to work with you on a project. Something about compassion in leadership." Alice smiled shyly. "That would be wonderful." And as they talked, something quiet began to bloom between them. A connection that felt honest, peaceful, and new. Later that evening, as the sun set again over Lagos, Alice received another text. "Is greater than Justice Margaret. Remember what I told you." Alice's life gives second chances to those who learn from their first mistake. Alice looked up at the darkening sky and whispered, "Thank you for giving me mine." But destiny wasn't done yet, because the next chapter of her story, the one involving Jacob, was only just beginning. The morning sun bathed Lagos in gold, the city hummed with energy cars honking, birds chattering on wires, and laughter spilling from the open courtyard of Christ the Light Chapel, where rows of white and blue ribbons fluttered gently in the breeze. Inside the grand church hall, people filled the pews, dressed in beautiful Nigerian attire, lace, agbada, and gele in every color. Cameras flashed, choirs rehearsed softly in the background, and at the center of it all, Alice stood before a mirror in her dressing room. She looked breathtaking, a glowing bride in an elegant white gown that shimmered under the morning light. Her once hard eyes were now calm and kind. Around her neck hung a tiny gold pendant, a gift from Justice Margaret. Written on it were 3 small words: "Grace found me." Her best friend, Teniola, adjusted her veil and smiled. "Alice, are you ready?" Alice turned, took a slow breath, and nodded. "I've never been more ready." "It's not oft." Teniola chuckled. "You sure you're not nervous? The entire city seems to be here." Alice laughed softly, but her voice trembled. "I'm not nervous about the people. I'm just overwhelmed by how far I've come." She looked down, tears of gratitude glistening in her eyes. "I was supposed to be behind bars, not walking down the aisle." Outside the chapel, Jacob Williams stood tall in a white tuxedo trimmed with gold. His friends teased him playfully, but his mind was elsewhere. He stared at the entrance doors, smiling to himself. Jacob was more than just a husband-to-be. He had been her anchor in the months after her trial patient. Humble and kind, they met through a charity project, and what started as collaboration grew into something deeper. He had once told her, "The way you talk about forgiveness, it feels like hope with a heartbeat." And now that hope was about to walk down the aisle to him. The organ began to play softly. The ushers moved. Everyone rose to their feet. The big wooden doors opened. Alice appeared radiant, calm, walking arm in arm with Justice Margaret herself. A gasp ran through the crowd. Some recognized the judge instantly. Others whispered in disbelief. The same woman whose dress Alice had once torn in the market, now walking her down the aisle as a mother would her daughter. The cameras flashed. The moment was magical. Alice's eyes glistened as she whispered, "My lord, thank you." Justice Margaret smiled, her voice low and warm. "No, my child. Today, you thank God for turning your punishment into purpose." Together, they walked slowly toward the altar. Jacob's eyes filled with tears as he watched her. Every step Alice took felt like a page being turned from shame to grace, from pride to peace. The ceremony began. The pastor smiled kindly. "We gather here today to celebrate love, not just between 2 hearts, but the kind that heals, forgives, and restores." Alice and Jacob exchanged vows, their voices trembling with emotion. "I promise," Jacob said, "to always remind you that your past is only proof that grace is real. And I promise," Alice whispered through tears, "to love you the way God and Justice Margaret taught me, with kindness and humility." When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted with applause and ululation. Jacob lifted her veil gently and kissed her forehead, and in that moment, the girl who once tore an old woman's dress now stood reborn, wrapped not in arrogance, but in grace. Later at the reception, laughter and music filled the air. Guests danced to live drums and flutes. Plates clattered with jollof rice, peppered goat meat, and fried plantain. The atmosphere sparkled with joy. Justice Margaret sat quietly at a corner table, watching Alice and Jacob dance. Her eyes softened with pride. When Alice noticed her, she excused herself from the dance floor and hurried over. "My lord," she said, kneeling slightly beside her. "I don't know how to thank you." Justice Margaret chuckled. "You already have, my dear, by living right." Alice smiled, tears pooling in her eyes again. "I never thought the woman I disrespected would become the mother I never had." The judge took her hand gently. "Life's tests often come dressed as people we look down on. The way we treat them decides whether we pass or fail." Alice nodded, overwhelmed. "You changed my story." Justice Margaret squeezed her hand. "No, Alice. God did. I was just there to remind you that mercy can wear a judge's robe too." As evening fell, Jacob led Alice outside the hall where the city lights shimmered over the lagoon. The cool air smelled of flowers and roasted corn from a nearby vendor. Remember the first time we met at the charity center? Jacob said, smiling. Alice laughed. You mean when I spilled water all over your laptop? He grinned. Exactly. And I said, don't worry, even accidents can be blessings. Alice smiled, leaning on his shoulder. You were right. He looked at her lovingly. You're proof that a mistake doesn't have to be your ending, it can be your beginning. They stood in silence for a while, just watching the city glow beneath the night sky. Then Alice looked up and whispered, If I ever have a daughter, I'll name her Margaret. Jacob chuckled softly. That's the most beautiful name I've ever heard. As the final fireworks lit up the night sky, Justice Margaret stepped outside quietly, her robe replaced by a simple blue lace gown repaired perfectly where Alice had once torn it. She watched the newlyweds laughing in the light and whispered to herself, Some tears are seeds. You never know what beauty they'll grow into. She smiled, clasped her hands together, and walked away into the night, her heart full of peace. Months later, Alice started a foundation called the Margaret Grace Initiative, helping young professionals learn emotional intelligence, kindness, and community service. She often spoke at conferences, telling her story not as a tale of shame, but as one of transformation. And every speech ended with her favorite words, is greater than, the woman whose dress I tore became the one who helped me mend my life. Never look down on anyone, for the hands you hurt today might be the ones that lift you tomorrow. The audience always rose to their feet, moved to tears, because in the end, Alice's story was no longer about a courtroom or a mistake. It was about redemption, the kind only love, humility, and forgiveness can bring. If you like this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.